right? And then I moved into, yes, Matt, I got it. You wanted to step in?
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just
No,
wanted to make sure
I just wanted
everyone's
to let everybody know before we got too far into it that we are going to be recording these, that this is strictly for those who registered for the event. In the event that they do want to get that CEU, this will not be dispersed outside of that. And yeah, and we just want to make sure that everybody is aware of that and cool with it before we continue. And I'm really sorry to mess up your flow there, but
That's
it didn't
okay.
happen.
That's okay. I was just on a little soapbox for a minute.
I'll let you get right back to it.
Where's the bugs? No. But my work has meandered through working with programs into private practice. I did testing and psychological evaluation for many years at wilderness adventure therapy programs, really deep level analysis about what was going on with people, in the hopes of kind of, passing on useful information that would help inform the treatment process. I do an IOP group that is really all about trauma. And essentially everything that I do falls under this lens. And yet it's really a complex lens on the one hand, and on the other lens, it's extremely simple. Because in my view, trauma recovery really comes down to one thing, and that's the ability to shift state. Okay. And what I mean by shift state means to go from a dysregulated state to a regulated state, or from a more neutral state to a state of well-being, because it's really critical to hold on to two pieces. One is that trauma and chronic stress robs us of the capacity to connect. And that trauma-informed care is essentially about creating connection so that the person can feel safe. And when the person feels safe, their brain moves into a different state. Okay. Two, trauma and chronic stress rob us of the capacity to experience well-being. You can't experience well-being if you don't feel safe. And if your brain and your nervous system are consistently giving you signals that the world is not safe, and you've been in that state for so long that you put that on everything that's in front of you, and you no longer have any recollection of the fact that it's about any sort of trauma, and neither does anybody else, right? That state has become a trait. So the essence of trauma-informed care really comes down to creating connection and creating safety. And I'm going to give you some more specifics around all that, but I want you to kind of just hold on to that as we move forward into this, okay? I want to highlight, again, I started talking about, I have bazillions of years of education. I'm like excessively overeducated. I went to undergrad for a bunch of years. I got a master's, and then I got a PhD, all of which took a long time. And I was really taught in the beginning that the care for trauma is to find out what the most painful thing that a person has been through has been, and go on and on about it, ask many probing questions, and really get like deeply into there and get them to disclose as much as possible, and to cry and cry and cry until they magically feel better. All right. Anybody else? You can just raise a hand. Anybody else kind of trained in that way at all, or kind of been steeped in that particular way? I know we don't think about it in that way because it sounds a little bit horrible when I say it that way, but that's really how I was trained. Am I the only one? Kind of, at least a little bit, right? Well, I'm going to offer the possibility that if you have been direct care staff, or you work with direct care staff in a program, that a lot of them carry that idea, right? And it's because a lot of times they're dealing with a lot of disclosure on the parts of clients and participants that are in the programs, and they don't know what to do, right? So they ask questions and they hold space, and the holding space part can be extremely healing, right? Creating that connection, creating that safety can be exceptionally healing, right? But trauma-informed care is about doing that with a greater degree of intention, while also truly buying into the idea that creating that connection, that creating that safety, and helping somebody get regulated enough to where they can experience that is truly the essence of trauma-informed care. Okay, so I want to just take a moment and let's just kind of play with this little activity for a second. For those of you that are signed on, or even if you're not, if you can see the video, I just want to kind of invite you to stand up for a second. Right, we're just going to do something fun here for a moment. Okay, right. And I just want you to take your finger and just point it up to the ceiling. Okay, just point it up to the ceiling and then just move it in a clockwise way. All right. And then just kind of moving it down, moving it down, moving it down, continuing to moving it in a clockwise way. Right, and then we're moving it up, and then we're moving it back up, and we're continuing to move it in a clockwise way. What'd y'all notice? Feel free to unmute and just toss yourself in the mix. Anybody notice anything with that?
I noticed that I was very happy to get moving because I've been sitting down for the majority of the day. I felt like this washover of gratitude that you had to stand up.
Nice, perfect, good, great. Anybody else? What y'all notice about the direction of the circle?
Yeah, the because of your perspective of where you're looking at it, I noticed the direction of my circle went from clockwise to counterclockwise.
Oh, look at that. So
Same here.
depending on the direction with which you looked at it, the direction changed. Anybody else? Anybody try really hard to keep it going in the same direction? I know I did. I was like, I've done this so many times. I'm still trying to get it to go in the clockwise way down here. Anybody else have that, or is that just me thing? Right. Good direction follower for a minute anyway. All right. Anybody else have anything they want to share about that?
I think mine slowed as it got lower as well.
Wow. Okay. So as things kind of slow down, they move, things get slower. Awesome. Good. All right. Well, we call that a perspective circle, just a simple little activity, and you're welcome to kind of make yourself comfortable again. And at a very basic level, the shift in the focus to trauma-informed care is all about perspective check. It's all about a shift in perspective, okay? A shift in place where we see things that we might have once seen as aggression, that we might have once seen as acting out, that we might have once seen as bad behavior or resistance or grounds for getting kicked out of a program or oppositionality or pushing back against authority, right? Those kinds of behaviors, it's really putting a trauma-informed lens on those and seeing those behaviors. I mean, while certainly they're still problematic, it's seeing those behaviors as a way to create safety in the best way that they know how. And so when we see it from that perspective, we intervene in a very, very different way. And so I want to give us a couple frameworks around that. So let me go ahead and start this PowerPoint. Wait for it. There we go. Oops, hold on. Okay, so from this perspective, okay, there are 6 guiding principles to a trauma-informed approach. Okay, and then we're going to go over a couple of different scenarios, and then I'm going to teach us a couple of different frameworks. Okay, so the first one is safety. All right, now when I say safety, what do I mean? All right, feel free just to unmute yourself and participate in whatever way feels good. What do I mean when I say safety?
For me, I think safety is when my nervous system's completely de-escalated. It's not really like a location for me. It's like very situationally dependent on whether I feel very calm or not.
Okay, so it's about you feeling calm. Okay, what else?
I was going to say a lot of safety relies on your connection with someone else, how comfortable you feel in the presence of another person.
So how calm you feel in your own body, how present you feel in the company of another person, how safe you feel. And so for you, it's about relationship. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say so.
Right. Anybody else? So safety is paramount. And I know this stuff is kind of like, a lot of times when people are involved with programs or political work, and I'm realizing kind of I was going to do a small group activity, but it might take too long. So I want to go back and circle back and at least introduce those of us in the group for a minute. But safety is physical safety, it's emotional safety, but most of all, it's relational safety. Right. And I know this is a big duh when I say it, but it's really important to understand the historical context of programs, residential programs, addiction programs that have historically relied on a lot of behavioral measures. And if you cross this line, then things are going to happen and you're going to get kicked out. You have to understand that there are consequences associated with your behavior. If you act in certain ways, bad things are going to happen. And we use that as a tool. Right. But a lot of times the people that we work with, and we all know this, but are carrying around these defensive behavioral patterns that have been designed to help keep them safe in some way. And then when we don't create the safety, we're going to escalate the behavioral patterns. And when we're trying to do treatment or clinical work or affect change with such people, and we're addressing the behavioral patterns, the defensive patterns, but not addressing the safety issue, right? And then we wonder why we have such high relapse rates, why it's so difficult to recover from mental health issues, why somebody does really awesome when they're in a program and then leaves and they don't hold up to that. So it's really a critical piece. So related to that and directly associated with that is trustworthiness and transparency. Okay, so when we say that from the perspective of trauma-informed care, what do we think that we mean? What might that be?
I'd say a lot of communication and feedback about comfortability and just open communication.
Yeah, right. What are we doing and why are we doing it? I think is another way to say that. Like one of the things when I do staff training that I really teach direct care staff a lot about, and if you again work with direct care staff, I would invite you just to pass this on, which is explaining why we do what we do, explaining why I'm being the way that I'm being. It's kind of like a form of self-disclosure, right? In a way, but this is why. It's not this is what we do, it's this is why we do it. And now that I'm interacting with you in this particular way, you can even take it a step further and say, and this is why I'm interacting with you in this particular way. Right. So it isn't just about programmatic tenets or this is why we do it, but even transparency in the way in which I'm interacting with you. And I just want to offer that I have found in my work with staff, that direct care staff find that actually very, very comforting. Right. Oh, I get it. There is no perfect phrase. We just say what we're doing and why we're doing it. And we say that in a way that creates safety. Peer support is another one. So really just drawing from peer support, allowing peers to support each other, allowing obviously people to share their stories. In wilderness programs that I worked with for many, many years, that was one of the critical pieces that were always found to be directly associated with the change process. But do we always do that? Do we always rely on that? Or our organizations during times of stress, during times of activation, when people are acting out, do we rely more on a top-down approach? The heavy-handed program administrator comes in, or a senior staff comes in, right? We're going to squash this behavior. We're going to do something different. We're going to threaten consequence, and then we're going to get this stuff in line. Right? Now, again, nobody likes to think that that's what's happening in your organization when I say it that way, but I do want to invite us all just to have a wide lens about historically that is often the way that it's been, and sometimes still is. And it often comes from the perspective of the fact that that's just the way that it's always been done. And that might affect, you might actually get compliance from that perspective. Okay. But are we really getting change? And if we're really working with people who have extensive trauma, which arguably life is trauma, okay, and the people that we're working with have been through much trauma, if we're working with it from that perspective, is that really what we're going to get? Okay. Collaboration and mutuality. Can we draw together as a team? Can we help people feel as though we're together working on the same team? Okay. We're on your side, right? We're here to support you. I see you. I understand what's going on with you, and I'm going to intervene. And I'm going to add, I'm going to intervene in a different way than that which you have historically gotten from your parents, okay, from your school, from the other programs that you've been into, from the treatment programs that you've been into. I'm going to help you see your behaviors as being a defensive action that's designed to help create safety in your world. And I'm going to help you see yourself that way. And I'm going to try to see you that way. And that is a huge, huge deal to help somebody see themselves in a different way. All right. Empowerment, voice, and choice. How do we empower people? How can we give choice? How can we help them? How can we help them feel as though they're involved in their own process? How can we help them feel as though they have choice? How can we empower them to feel as though they have a voice and that they can use their voice appropriately? And then cultural, historical, and gender issues. Are we taking those appropriately into account? So I'm wondering for all of you, what you might add. If we're going to call that some basic core tenets of a trauma-informed care approach, what might be missing? What do you add? What's resonating with you here?
I always think of resiliency as a really large piece of trauma-informed care, as kind of that thoughts towards, healing and growth, and that continued work as well.
So when you say resiliency, what do you mean?
I guess the ability to, overcome adverse experiences, or persevere through challenges, things like that.
Okay. The ability to overcome adverse experiences, persevere through challenge. I was talking with a brilliant friend of mine earlier today, and she was talking about resilience as being able to find resource all around you. All right, which I would add in is related to everything that you said, that I am able to resource myself, which I will say is calm my nervous system in the midst of life stressors in such a way that helps me stay in a more resilient place. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's the ability to experience well-being in your surroundings in such a way that can help you find your center again during times of heightened stress. So I'm just playing with that definition to try to bring in some additional pieces into that. All right. If I can find resource around me through the relationships that are safe and transparent and supportive, all right, and that meet my needs and meet my historical context and meet me where I'm at and understand the ways in which I might be marginalized, I'm going to be more resilient because I find that safety. So what else? What do y'all think about that model? Anything missing? Anything that you would add into it?
I maybe say, and it's kind of, I suppose, captured in the trustworthiness, but I'm thinking about one person in particular and how much like consistency or dependability upon the sort of situational framework and the people, matters. And so the trustworthiness piece kind of speaks to that, but yeah, consistency, dependability, that I can sort of expect the same things. Yeah.
Yeah. So consistency, dependability, trustworthiness, right? And I'm going to add in that I want to also loop that back into transparency. If I, am working with Colin and I know that when I act out a certain way, he kind of has to sort of step in and respond to me in a way, and maybe his tone shifts and things change in the way he's going to do, he's likely to explain to me why he's doing that. Right? I'm feeling like I need to stand up really big and tall here right now and kind of meet you where we're at, right? In the hopes that that might kind of get your attention. And then we're going to try to calm things down a little bit. Is that okay with you? Like, that's transparency, right? That's consistency. When we do that, we are doing awesome trauma-informed care, because then the person understands where we're at and why we're at, and we're stepping into pure authenticity. Authenticity leads to safety. All right. So I'm just kind of trying to layer things together in the way that we're talking about them. So I wanted to take a minute. I was going to do a small group introduction because I thought the group would be bigger, but if you all wouldn't mind just going around and just saying your name, where you're at, and maybe kind of, just one sentence or two about what brings you to this talk, just so I know a little bit more about everybody's background.
I'll go first. I don't mind. My name is Erica. I'm in Ohio. I came to this talk because I needed to attend some type of virtual event for one of my classes. I'm a social work student at Bowling Green State University. I'm in my last semester currently, and I'm interning actually at a hospital in the transitional care unit and also in the nursing home that's attached. So obviously trauma-informed care is very important in those situations. A lot of the people I deal with are older adults, so these are individuals who don't necessarily talk about trauma, don't necessarily feel comfortable exploring those things, but it's still important to understand how that may affect them.
Great, thanks. How about I'll just point people out because they're kind of in order on my screen. Bex, did you already introduce yourself?
No, but I will. I'm Bex. I am the program director of Pivot Point, who's hosting the talk. And I'm here because I host the talk.
Awesome. Chandler?
Hello, everyone. I'm Chandler. I am a therapist at Asheville Academy for Girls here in Asheville, North Carolina. And I'm also the recreational therapist. So I get to do all the experiential learning, adventure therapy, things like that. And just working in a residential setting, oftentimes many of our students have trauma in their past and their experiences. So just being able to come at that residential setting with a trauma-informed care, I think is really important, especially for young adolescents during this time to heal.
Great. Good. Ben?
Hey everyone, hi Sandy. My name is Ben. So I'm based in Sydney. I work as a caseworker in a homeless crisis accommodation center in inner city. So I do work with a lot of residents and clients with different issues, AOD, trauma, mental health. I'm also just finishing up my studies in social work. I have a counseling qualification as well. Yep.
Thanks. Welcome. Maurice?
I'm Maurice Murray, and I live in Asheville, and I work 4 days for an agency in West Asheville and 1 day in private practice, and I specialize in people with PTSD and other anxiety disorders. My background is working with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and I'm here just to meet new people and learn new perspectives, and just come in here with an open mind and open heart. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Colin?
Yeah, hey everyone. My name's Colin. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm a LPCC here, and I've previously worked in a private practice, and within this last year started myself and a couple co-founders have started a program called Trek, and it's basically an adventure therapy program where we do like traditional outpatient, but also do like some limited expeditions using kind of wilderness therapy type interventions. usually on weekends. We do it in sort of a therapy and then more of a therapeutic sense, where one is therapy with diagnosis, treatment planning, and all that, and the rest is just like the other side of it would be offering it to groups where it's helpful, beneficial, but it's not therapy. Yeah, so that's me.
Thanks. Hannah?
Hi guys, Raleigh, North Carolina. I work at a private practice. I mainly work with women. I've recently been trained in EMDR, and so I'm kind of hoping to use just trauma-informed care when introducing EMDR and to help even after processing.
Thanks. Matt?
I'm Matt Nanis. I'm the executive director of Pivot Point. I'm privileged to have Sandy Nuez on our board of directors and think that her brain is fascinating. So any opportunity to get insights into it, I welcome. I also, one of the main reasons we started this not-for-profit was not only to amplify access to participants, but also to provide a rich and fruitful and beneficial background and context for the direct care staff that we use because of the amount of contact they have with the clients that we're trying to support. And to that end, we've been able to benefit from the clinical first responder training that Sandy runs through Peak Experience, and our guides who engaged in that haven't stopped talking about it, and it was quite some time ago. So I wanted to sit in myself.
Good. We have one coming up at the end of October if anybody's interested. So shameless plug. Kira.
Hello, everyone. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but I recently relocated to Florida, and I'm a licensed professional counselor. My training includes child and adolescent trauma care. I'm a trauma-informed yoga and meditation teacher. I've also trained in relational trauma repair with Tian Dayton and experiential group trauma therapy. So this is definitely a passion of mine. The reason I'm here is because you can never know too much. And with the field of trauma therapy, it's like the research just keeps pouring in, and I love to just hear more perspectives and what other people are doing. I think the reason I'm so passionate about it is because in my experience working in mental health, I kept seeing clients go through different levels of care, and they kept being told, oh, hold on to your trauma. You'll deal with that when you go to inpatient, or you'll deal with that when you go to outpatient, or you'll deal with that when you get your individual therapist. And the trauma just kept getting passed on. And it made me really want to just dive in and start working with trauma right away. Starting with safety, strengths, and then going right to it, because that's usually like the most important thing. Currently, I'm a recovery coach, and that's my passion. Happy to be here. Thanks.
Right. Thank you. Melody?
Hi. Yeah, I'm based in Vancouver, Canada, and I work in the family service centers, and I deal with a lot of clients with developmental traumas and complex traumas. As some training background as a family violence specialist, so I also have clients who experience child abuse and family violence survivors. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And Shelby.
Hi, I'm calling in from Portland, Oregon. I'm a third year counseling student, and I'm an internship at a clinic and also at a working therapeutic farm where I work mostly with, or predominantly with, Medicaid recipients that are children, teens, and families. And then I have a background of wilderness therapy as well.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. So I wanted to just take a moment and just kind of share a scenario. about something that actually happened in an IOP group that I run. I was trying to come up with scenarios. I was like, oh, gotta have the best scenario. And I was like, oh, this just happened. Like just so I wanted to just kind of talk about this from the perspective of what might we have done that wasn't trauma informed, and what maybe could have happened that was trauma informed. I'm happy to share what I did with it, but this isn't like an effort to try to highlight that I was awesome. I will tell you right off the bat that I was facilitating this and it was really hard. And so I run this IOP group, and there was a couple guys there, and it's young adults, young adult males who identify as male in a recovery program. And they've all been through a bunch of treatment and they have tons and tons of trauma. And I want to be clear when I talk about trauma, to me, trauma is anything in life that has overwhelmed your sense of security and safety in the world that didn't land in a place that allowed you to re-regulate and come back to a place of safety. Okay, so we can get into this hierarchical ordering of what is and isn't traumatic, but that's not relevant. And what I tell all my clients and all my groups is that every single thing that you've experienced in your life up until this moment influences the way that your brain interprets and engages with this moment. And so those experiences that you had that overwhelmed your sense of safety and security in the world, particularly when they did not land in a place of safety with another or others who helped you re-regulate, impact your brain. And then that impacts the next moment, which impacts the next moment, which impacts the next moment. And so for me, trauma-informed care is far less about processing the trauma, right? We've got a lot of people on this call just now amongst this group that are really experienced at that and are using different techniques that you've identified to process trauma. And while of course that is awesome, and I would never say don't do that, I also want to be clear that especially for direct care staff and staff training, we don't ever have to process the trauma to do trauma-informed work, right? There need be no trauma, like the trauma, okay? Because the trauma is the impact that it had on our brains and our nervous systems and the way we do relationship and the way we perceive the world and the way that our lens becomes distorted when our nervous system gets activated into that survival mode, okay? So from that perspective, okay, I had a group, and the first thing that happens when the group comes in, we have a new guy in group, and we've got a couple people. It's a 12-week long group. We've got various people. There's about 4 people, 5 people there, various stages, and one of them is brand new. And the first thing that happens is I come down and one of them's like, so I don't know, somebody went home sick and we might have a bunch of people in the group that, you know, that are like in the house that maybe they have COVID or maybe they don't, or I don't really know, or maybe they're faking it, but I feel like maybe we should be outside. And I'm like, I have unvaccinated kids at home. I'm like, I don't want to get the COVID. I don't really want a bunch of people in my office anyway. And I definitely don't want the sick ones. Like, so, right. So my nervous system is immediately activated. Okay, what do we do? Right. So we pivot and we go outside and I'm like, okay, hold on. We got to get chairs and does everybody have a mask and what are we doing? And I got to get a chair. And like, this is me and my own dysregulation. Okay. Like, but I'm also kind of rocking it. Right. I'm like pivoting. I'm figuring out how we're going to handle it. I'm going to do all the things. And I've got like, I'm an outdoors person. So my car is like full of things one can sit on. So I like pull everything out of the car. And we sit down and we like sit in a group and I don't really do anything to bring us into it. I just kind of like plop us all down on like mats. And then I'm like, oh, I should do an opening because I always do an opening. And I'm like, okay, we're going to do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Like, what's one I can just bust out? Does everybody know what that is? Where we do like, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you touch? What do you taste? What do you smell? Very powerful. I don't mean to diminish it. It's extremely powerful, even if you've done it hundreds of times. Right. So I do it, but I kind of bumble through it. I'm like, blah, 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 blah. And I realized that I did touch twice and taste. I forgot to do taste. And I was like, oh, sorry, I forgot to do taste. And then, so in the midst of all that, and then I'm like, okay. And then I'm explaining the group and I'm beginning to calm down. I'm getting into my groove. I'm like doing some things that I do. I explain my trauma group and this is what we do. And then this new guy, who was the one that informed us about the COVID, comes in and he like, his whole demeanor changes. I've asked him to introduce himself. He begins to roll a cigarette. And then I'm like, sorry, we don't smoke in group, even if we're outside. And then he like throws the cigarettes on the ground. It's like roll your own. He throws it on the ground and then he sits there for a minute. And I'm like, good technique. However, you did a real nice job with the rolling of that. And then he like literally like goes like this. I'm going to stare at you, Matt, just because I need to stare at somebody. right? Let's just do fixed gaze for a moment. We can break that anytime, but so like literally this guy's just staring at me. He's staring at me with this fixed gaze, like into my eyes, and then his face goes blank. Okay, so my assessment thing, he'd already mentioned DID, he'd already mentioned other things. He'd said, there are various things, but he just stares at me. And then, so this is new, right? I haven't had this happen for a really long time. And we're a small group of young adults. So my reaction is like, are you freaking kidding me? For God's sakes, you're not really just going to like sit here and stare at me and throw cigarettes at the ground, are you? I'm kind of reactive myself. I was pissed, right? So then I'm like, okay, what are we doing? And so, right? And so then the other group is like sketching out and everything. Okay, so let's freeze frame for a moment. If you're in my position, what does that pull for in you? Not what is your best self going to do in that moment, but what do you want to do in that moment?
Get on his level because I'm irritated.
So you want to be irritated back? I mean, that's what I did.
Yeah, a little bit, because he threw his cigarettes on the ground and then he was staring at you.
Right. And the staring was extremely unsettling. Like it was not, he wasn't just like, I mean, he was like, we were having a staring contest, the kind that one can't not stare at.
I was going to say, I'd like to think I wouldn't do this, but I would hold the gaze and not want to break first, because I would go back to how I was with training my dog. And there's like an element of whoever breaks the gaze first is the one who's submissive. And I want to maintain the power dynamic that I didn't really want to create until this moment.
Right. I did that for a minute. I was like, am I supposed to stare back at you? Like, okay. Right? Super weird. And then I started to feel anxious. I was like, is he gonna like hurt me? What is happening here? All right. So what would you do?
Name it. Ask him maybe who you were reminding him of.
Okay. So I can tell that you're staring at me and I'm wondering if I'm reminding you of somebody.
Yeah, okay. or a scenario that he's been in before.
Right. Shelby just put role model safe conflict resolution. So any thoughts on how you might want to do that?
I would probably just engage in like figuring out how we could like safely move on from the topic or whatever was happening between the two of you, despite probably feeling activated myself if I were in the situation.
Right. Keeping in mind, I've known this guy for like 8 minutes, right? And the first 4 minutes were all about COVID. And the next 3 minutes were all about me bumbling my way through a mindfulness exercise in a pretty crappy way, right? Anybody else have any thoughts?
I might, excuse me, I might let this individual know how the prolonged gaze is impacting me, and that it's that I am having a reaction to the fact that there's being a held gaze here, and that I'm not sure what the quality or flavor of that is as far as intention is concerned, but here's what I can sense inside me is happening. And if I can model and explain that in a grounded way with some semblance of resourcing myself, that maybe I can open the field in a discussion to encourage him to maybe attempt to articulate what it is, like what's behind the eye contact.
Great. Yeah. So I'll tell you what I did, right? After I went through all of my crappy responses, and the reason why I want to highlight those crappy responses is 1, we're all human. 2, it's completely normal, right? That we all go through that. And 3 is that shift in perspective. And so, client-centered trauma-informed care, especially if you're in a place where we're working with staff, is to, just as we did with this kind of, funny little circle thing, is to really shift our perspective, right? And I wanted to go head to head with this guy. I wanted to have him leave my group. I really did. I was like, if you don't want to participate, you don't have to stay. I was trying to be nice about it, but like, and so I was like, oh, I'm not doing the thing. Right. And so I like calmed myself down. I did exactly what Matt said. I was totally transparent. I was just like, I'm sorry, I'm just weirding out. Like, you're staring at me in this way. It's sketching me out. We started from this COVID thing that also weirded me out. I'm aware of the fact that I bumbled my way through, right, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 thing. And it really probably wasn't very grounding. So I think I screwed up in the way that I set this frame. And I'm sorry. And I'm totally weirding out right now with the way that you're staring at me. And I'm not exactly sure what to do. And so then I turned to the other group guys. And so you see the transparency in that, right? And so a strong effort to build trust through transparency. And maybe this is all just obvious to all of you, but it's not what I would have done 5 years ago, or certainly 10 years ago. So I turned to the other guys and I was like, I don't really know what to do now. Like, is this kind of like normal behavior, or how do you all want to proceed? Because it's your group too. At which point they did exactly the thing. They offered peer support. They're like, dude, what are you doing? This is sort of weird. We've seen you talk before. Right. Like, and then they're like, well, okay. And so then they went on and did their check-ins, and I was regulating myself and calming myself down. Right. And then we gave him the space. And then after the break, he's like, I could introduce myself now. I was like, great. And he said, I don't think that you're competent. I was like, I might not have been in those moments. I really don't think I was. Like, you got it. He's like, you did the thing where you said touch twice and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you say, all this stuff about the brain, and you can't do any of those things. I was like, you're right. I can't, and I didn't, and I failed. I'm super, super sorry. Right. And then fast forward, and he proceeds to tell us how he had an awesome therapist, and the best therapist he'd ever had at his last place, who did awesome mindfulness stuff, and he really trusted, and then he had to stop the therapy because they ran out of money. Okay. And so boom, we have it. Right now we've walked into why this trauma-informed lens is so critical. Okay. And my backing out of that, he could have left the group. We could have had a face-off. All kinds of weird things could have happened. The rest of the group could have sat there. I could have gotten more regulated, whatever. Any number of things could have happened. Okay. But we very, very quickly got to what the real deal was. And I'm certain it was because of that transparency piece. Now, again, I'm not trying to highlight myself as being an awesome therapist, or it was as much just a trust in my own transparency and a trust in the process, but it was also about me regulating myself. Okay, because I was pissed at that guy, and I felt unsettled, and I felt unsafe. And so I wanted to just bring that up. So what are some other lenses that we might have seen that? If we're not looking at the true trauma-informed care, how might we have seen that guy?
He's oppositional or aggressive.
Right. Yeah. Right. And the thing is that he was oppositional and aggressive. It's just that and this is kind of the essence of the shift. The oppositional and aggressive behavior came from the fact that he didn't feel safe. It wasn't that he was just doing that. And the belief that and the knowing that I did something to create that. And that I can also do something to shift it. That we're not just going to get into these patterns. Any thoughts or comments on that? Anybody had a similar situation where they handled well, or maybe not so well, or maybe in the past you didn't handle it well, but now you would handle it well?
I was pretty young into my field instructor life, and had this kid in my group just hate me for no apparent reason. And I don't think I handled it well. I took it super personally and was unable to see the behavior for what it was and unattach it from the person. And then it turned out on like day 45, it was because I reminded him of his mom. And I was like, oh, I should never let this bother me again. It's just projection. And it was a great learning moment, but I definitely didn't handle it well.
Well, and I would just argue that, the possibility that everything is projection, right? If every single thing that we've experienced in our life up until this moment influences how we see this moment, which I truly believe it does, then everything is projection, right? Like, it's like, and useful to see that. So, all right. Well, I wanted to offer a couple more kind of, slide pieces. I had a couple more scenarios that we could talk about, but maybe we'll get back to them. So creating a trauma-informed environment, really want to highlight using these following principles. Okay, again, safety, choice, empowerment. Empowerment is noticing capabilities in an individual, noticing what somebody's good at. Right? And of course, right, we think that we do that, but do we really? Collaboration, making decisions together. Okay, and trustworthiness. Right? How can we create these core things from the very, very beginning? Okay, what did I do in those moments, those initial times with that new participant that did not create these things that led to that type of defensive, seeking safety, acting out? That could have gone very, very wrong, and still might have. Right? We'll see if he comes back. But I want to give you a couple frameworks. I'm sure most of you at some point have heard this, have seen this, but I live and die by that sounds so dramatic. I teach all of my clients, every group, every client that I work with, I teach the hand model of the brain, and I teach the resilient zone. And I wanted to offer those as a couple frameworks and then land in a couple of things that we can do again to create that, and then open it for discussion. Okay. So I teach this, and the reason why I teach this, and I teach this at the beginning of every course of therapy, again, every group that I have. I do not teach this as a crisis intervention tool. I teach this, I have this idea that all programs or all group practices or all individual clinicians, that we would teach people these at the very, very beginning so that they can begin to understand. Okay. So the hand model of the brain is just this, and this is exactly the way that I teach it, that I introduce it to clients. And the reason why I'm going to tell you this is because when we flip our lid, when we're out of our resilient zone, that's when all of the behaviors come. And so understanding that gives us the lens from which to approach it in a more trauma-informed way. Okay, so this is the hand model of the brain, and I teach it to my clients just like this. If I'm online, I do it like this. If I'm in the person, I'm like, okay, this is a rough and rudimentary model of the brain. Okay, Dan Siegel pioneered this. You can get his YouTube video online. Okay, back brain, midbrain, front brain. Okay, back brain has one job and one job only, and that's to keep you alive. Okay, survival brain. Right, this part of the brain runs your entire autonomic functions: digestion, respiration, circulation, reproduction. Okay, it moves us into fight, flight, or freeze when it gets activated, when we encounter some sort of threat. And when it's calm, it goes into rest and digest. These things are constantly moving, and they're constantly moving by the breath. Okay, the breath, the oxygen that we take in, activates that. Okay, now when this part of the brain is activated, we are ready to move into fight or flight or freeze mode. Okay, because that's what we need to do. This part of the brain is also extremely reactive. Okay, this part of the brain moves in like 0.0001 millisecond, or just some indeterminable, tiny little snippet of time. Okay, outside of your conscious awareness, and it needs to. Okay, if you're in a lane, if you're driving your car in a lane, and suddenly a semi is in your lane and you have to be over on the side of the road. Anybody ever have that happen? When you don't exactly know how you got there, right? Or some other threat, you responded in a split second. This is how people lift cars off of other people. Okay, their nervous system gets so activated that we have this superhuman strength and this extreme levels of reactivity. And that's awesome when we need it, but it's not so awesome when we're interacting with our roommate, as if our roommate is a predator that's trying to kill us or eat us. And that's so often what we see. Okay, it's so often what this mistake on these behaviors and these defensive ways of being, it's about the survival brain being activated. Okay, midbrain, limbic system. Okay, This part of the brain here, this part of the brain, here's a critical piece that might not always be said in this speech if you've heard it a million times. This part of the brain only speaks the language of sensation. So this part of the brain takes all sensory information that comes in, little snippets. What do we see? What do we hear? What do we touch? What do we taste? What do we smell? And it determines safe, not safe, safe, not safe. Okay. If safe, thinking brain, which I'll talk about next, comes online. If not safe, survival brain is online, and survival brain will always win over thinking brain because of the extreme level of reactivity. Okay. And because an organism's job is to stay alive beyond all else. Okay. Here's the kicker. This part of the brain gets activated and that energy doesn't get moved through the body. Peter Levine calls it sequencing. If it doesn't move through the body and get released, either by fighting or running or shaking it off, if we go into a freeze response, it stays in there and our nervous system remains activated, at which point our amygdala begins to take all the little sensory snippets of information and encode them as being suggestive that a tiger is about to jump out from behind the bush. And the feedback loop continues. So that's why people stay in these states of chronic activation over time, because more and more things become encoded, not necessarily of just a tiger. I mean, I use that as obviously a predator, something that's going to kill us or eat us, but they're suggestive that a tiger is going to emerge. Okay. When you go through life in that state, in this highly reactive state, we put that state onto the world in front of us and we think it's about that. And then we act in these defensive ways that sometimes creates that which we're the most fearful of. And then we've just created a whole nother trauma response. So complex trauma, it feeds on itself. It just goes and goes and goes. And that's why it's about the state and not about the content. Okay. The state is the state of activation that comes from that, and the nervous system, high levels of reactivity, right? Being in that fight, flight, or freeze state and putting that onto the world, not about the processing of the content. Okay. Now, thinking brain comes online. Thinking brain, this is our frontal and prefrontal cortex. This is responsible for decision making and impulse control, focus, concentration, putting together plans, making goals. Okay. Putting that down, being able to do that. Anybody who's doing any type of trauma-informed care, we want our clients and the staff that we work with to have their thinking brains in the game. Okay. But once survival brain gets activated and the amygdala is screaming out that there's tigers, or there could be tigers lurking behind the bush, thinking brain goes offline or is greatly diminished in its functioning. Okay. At that point, good decision-making goes out the window. Okay. I failed miserably in getting my thinking brain online and the thinking brains back online from the group when I totally moshed my way through that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in a totally non-effective way. Right. Well, we were all kind of freaking out about COVID and I was trying to figure out where we were going to sit. All right. That didn't help. Right. I was dysregulated. My thinking brain was offline, and it took me the time to get my thinking brain back online to be able to shift to move into that more successful way. Okay. So super critical, even if you've heard that a million times, I just invite you to think about it as a teaching tool to teach to others, because my clients love this and they understand the difference. And so the whole focus then of my work, once I've taught this, becomes about the resilient zone. Whoa, hold on, where did it go? Okay. And the resilient zone is a resilient nervous system responds to threat in a way that's reasonably proportionate to the degree of threat in the environment. We don't respond to things as if they're life-threatening events or something that's trying to kill us or eat us. We respond to stressors as if they're stressors. Right? I might get stressed out over an unpaid bill and I might go to the top side of my resilient zone. Right? I might get edgy or agitated or anxious or worried about how I'm going to do that, but then I solve the problem and I go down to calm but alert. Okay. And we move through that. Our nervous system is designed to do that. Okay. In contrast, when somebody's nervous system has been impacted by chronic stress and trauma, okay, and their amygdala has been busily categorizing everything in their world as being suggestive that a tiger could emerge, okay, same sensory information comes in, same unpaid bill sends their nervous system into a complete state of hyperarousal. And they might be up in the high zone, and it might be looking like that. It might be irritable, anxious, manic, anxiety, panic, angry outbursts, rage, or they might go kind of like bop back down and go down into this low zone, depressed, sad, isolated, exhausted, fatigued, numb, or they might go back and forth between them. Okay. So the essence of trauma-informed care from this perspective is quite simple. It's, are you in the zone or out of the zone? How do you know the difference? Okay. To me, this is the essence of the whole thing. It's not about identifying what the trauma is. It's not even about figuring out what content is or what is the thing that's bothering you. That's useful from the perspective of understanding yourself. And there's a place for that. Some of you mentioned EMDR. Some of you mentioned other types of trauma reprocessing. There is 100% a place for that. Right. And I'm not saying don't do that, but I am saying that we can do extremely good trauma-informed care without ever doing that work, without ever getting to like the trauma. Okay. And this is what I teach. Are you in your zone or out of your zone? How do you know the difference? Okay. So just for a moment, thinking about yourself, okay? How do you know when you're in your zone? All right. You can put it in the chat, or if you want to unmute, how do you know you're in your, or how do you know you're in your zone? What are some clues that you're in your zone?
I'd say my like heightened definitely an anxiety. And then I feel like my avoidance pattern comes out more of like just heightened anxiety, and that like flee / avoid kind of pattern sometimes shows up.
Right. Yeah. Anybody else?
I'm sorry. Are we talking about how do I know when I'm in the resilient zone? Or
did I mix it up? Either one. What's it like for you when you're in your zone versus out of your zone? What's the difference?
I feel as if I can engage in a, like participate in a situation or in my surroundings when I'm in my resilient zone. I sense as I'm responding that I'm responding. There is less of a visceral reactivity to outside influences.
Nice. Yeah. I know for myself, when I'm out of my zone, I'm a fast talker anyway, so it's not always that I'm out of my zone when I'm talking fast, but I start talking really fast, my voice gets tight, and I get this forward momentum in my shoulders, almost like I'm a fight person. Like I'm more likely to go into fight, right? And so I'm just like, and I can feel it. And the more forward I am, the more I know that I'm about to flip my lid. Very, very useful information for me to have. But here's the thing, we all have it. Okay. I'm not like more messed up. I mean, I might be, right? But we all have a nervous system. We all have a body. We all have a brain. So your brain and your nervous system has been influenced in these ways. And so teaching people what it's like to be in your zone versus out of your zone, and helping them really dial into that, and using, for those of you who do individual therapy, really using the therapeutic relationship as a tool to help them understand, right? When we go deeper. Okay. I noticed that, when we kind of touch on certain topics, that it seems like maybe it bumps you out of your zone. I'm wondering if you're aware of that. Okay. In programs, teaching people in programs about this so that we can begin to feed that back to staff. Seems like you're really out of your zone right now. Is there anything that I can do to help you get back in your zone? Because the core pieces are this: are you in your zone or out of your zone? How do you know the difference? Okay. We like literally teach people to develop an awareness. And then the second piece is, when you're out of your zone, don't do anything but get back in your zone. Okay. So if we're working with other people and they're really escalated, we don't want to threaten consequences. We don't want to, kind of get all heavy handed. We don't want to do anything. We want to create safety. We want to create transparency. We want to create connection, right? We want to see if we can get some collaboration, and if we can get some peer support. And if there's a consequence that needs to happen, say you're in a program and somebody like broke the rules or whatever that might be, then, or in an outdoor leadership program for that matter, there's a time and a place for that. It's just that it's not in the middle of that, because we don't want to misperceive somebody as being out when they're out of their zone as deliberately acting out. Okay? These are defensive things that come from nervous system dysregulation. Questions or comments about that? Okay, I want to just do a little activity. This is called resourcing. I'm not going to go over that just for the purposes of time, but this is something that I teach all of my clients too. I call it a TMOJ. Works great in a group, right? It's a form of resourcing. So I just want to just invite you for a moment. Kind of, we've been talking about this being out of the zone. And of course, that's kind of getting everybody thinking about the times when you were out of the zone and maybe some of the stressors in your life. And I've asked you to be aware of that. Now we're just going to do a little thing to try to shift state, because again, trauma-informed care is all about the capacity to shift state. So I want to invite you to think for a moment, just about a tiny moment of joy that you've experienced. Doesn't have to be the moment or the biggest moment, a tiny moment. Right? Maybe a snippet of something you saw, or a moment that you shared with another human or a nature being, or just being in a place in the world. Just a tiny moment of joy. And I want you to put yourself fully in that moment. Fully in that moment of joy. Just notice what it looked like, what the lighting was like, what was there. Your natural world beings, human beings. What was the lighting? What were the colors? Yeah, just really putting yourself in that TMOJ. And what did it sound like? Were there voices or nature sounds or animal sounds? What did it sound like? Take a moment and just let that sink fully into your bones. Were there any smells? Maybe there were outdoor smells, or every human or animal or place or bed for that matter has a smell. Just see if you can get that smell, and just take the extra moment to really just get it and let it go into your bones. Any taste? Did you taste anything? Did you taste anything when you were there? Eating, or just the air maybe tasted, or I don't know. And then touch. Were you moving through the world? Were you touching anything? Was there softness or coarseness or fur, skin, or natural beings, or the air, the temperature, movement, pressure? You sitting or standing, laying down? And again, just taking that moment and putting yourself fully in that tiny moment of joy, that TMOJ. Again, just noticing what it looked like and sounded like and smelled like and tasted like, and what it was like to touch it or be in it. And now taking a moment and just noticing what's happening for you on the inside. You might notice a difference in your breathing or your heart rate, or sensations in your chest or belly. You might notice a difference in the quality of your thoughts. They might be loose or spinning or flatter or tighter, or the quality of your emotions. Or you might not notice anything, and that's okay too. If you did notice anything, I just invite you to think in terms of the resilient zone. Did that resourcing activity make a difference in terms of where you are in your zone? Are you more in the zone? Less in the zone? Did it connect? Did it not? Paying particular attention to just those shifts in state. Anybody want to share anything about what that was like for them?
My chest felt very warm.
Mm-hmm. And is that a shift from where you were before?
Oh, yeah.
Great. Good. Awesome. Anybody else notice any shifts?
Just more stillness, and my breath definitely settled down a lot.
Good. Great. Are you all seeing this connection with the resilient zone? I'm kind of trying to cram a lot of stuff in a short period of time, right? Using resourcing is a way to help people go either get back in the zone when they're out of the zone, or it's a way for them to deepen the experience of being in the zone. So it's best to teach resourcing from a place of more well-being. Sorry, we've got some fly-ins here, right? And then it's not a crisis intervention tool. It's a tool to use when people are moderately dysregulated and they need to experience well-being. And it always helps to tell people, right, that trauma and chronic stress robs you of the capacity to experience well-being. Our job to help you recover from trauma or recover in general or from mental health is to help you experience well-being, right? This is a major, major shift in my work. And it puts me kind of more into the arena of positive psychology, but really understanding that trauma and chronic stress rob us of the capacity to connect and experience well-being. And so my job is to create connection and to help people create, recognize, and then deepen into experiences of well-being so that their nervous system can get used to being in the zone. Okay. And we do that through sensation. Okay. So our brain speaks the language of sensation. Every other word that we've ever learned comes from sensation. So that's why we do all the mindfulness stuff. That's why we do all the body-based stuff. Keeping in mind when somebody's out of the zone, their thinking brain is offline. So trying to talk to them in a way other than connecting, trying to process in a cognitive way, trying to remind them of consequences, trying to kind of is not necessarily the most effective way. Okay. So that's the resourcing. And I want to just kind of offer this. This is a friend of mine, Bobby Beal. Bobby is a psychologist. She works for Case Western University in Ohio, and she teaches this, kind of the 4 R's of trauma-informed care. Realize how widespread trauma is. Realize how many people are impacted. Realize that so much of what we see is trauma. I recognize the signs and symptoms of it in clients, families, and staff, and others involved in the system. Respond by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices, and really resist re-traumatization. I could have easily re-traumatized that guy in my group if I hadn't gotten myself more regulated. It's highly likely that he would have walked out. I would have recreated another experience where he didn't trust another therapist, and he may never trust me, and that's okay. And maybe that was because of that, or maybe that was just the way it is. But I know that, shifting that dynamic in that moment, hopefully I didn't re-traumatize him. And then the last thing I want to share is that the road to trauma-informed care, and organizational culture, we want to really look at any re-traumatizing policies, look at this internal trauma team. Are we training our staff? Are we training our programs? Are we training ourselves? Right? Have you heard it all before, or are you going to go deeper into it? Because it's a way of being in the world, not just a skill set and a knowledge base. Okay. What are we going to do to create a trauma-informed culture? Are we going to train our staff? If so, how? All right, and then how are we going to evaluate it? And then how are we going to bring assessment into that? And for that perspective, for those of you who are doing individual therapy, I'm going to add the piece about how can we assess for a trauma response, not just traumatic events. Okay, and that's sort of the lens, the ever evolving lens. Okay, if somebody's got a lot of complex trauma, is it more important for us to get at all the specific events? Or is it more important for us to understand the trauma responses as they're showing up? And then how are we going to intervene on both of those levels? So, all right. So I know I went over my 8 o'clock time, but I did hope that it was okay with some introductions in the middle there. So where do we want to go from here? We got about 15 minutes left. I'm happy to answer questions, discuss things, talk about more scenarios, talk amongst ourselves.
Yeah, I was just gonna thank you again formally, Sandy, for sharing this. I have seen her live with the brain and the thing, think it was 2019 when I last saw that part of the presentation. And yes, typically we like to keep the last 20 minutes or so for sharing where everyone's from and why they've come to this talk, because we've already done that. If anyone has any self-reflections about the content or any questions specifically for Sandy, or anticipated applications of this material or examples of the applications of this material, we're on here for probably about 5 minutes past 8. It's probably about 8:35 because we did start a little late. So the space is yours, and I would encourage you to take advantage of the time that we have Sandy here with a topic that she's so informed and passionate about.
I just wanted to thank you because I made a tweak to a workshop plan that I'm giving in a couple weeks based on your TMOJ, the tiny moment of joy. I have been running an activity called Moment of Joy for a few years in experiential therapy. And to be more trauma informed, I like the idea of suggesting that it just needs to be a tiny moment of joy, because I don't know who's going to be in the room, even in advance. 30 random people are going to show up for my workshop, and offering that just some small thing is something that they could find as a resource in that moment, instead of putting someone on the spot who might feel like they're in a really dark place and that they can't find a super big moment of joy. So I really appreciated that. And I just liked that experience for me personally. I didn't share when we were doing it, but it brought a big smile to my face and I felt great after that. So thank you.
Oh, good. I love that. Thank you. I think it's super important to really, that piece about, people can get really lost in like a resource, like, it's just like, it's anything.
Yeah.
Right. Like I said, in the beginning, like when my friend Mari said to me today, she's like, yeah, I think resilience is the ability to find resource all around you. I was like, wow. Right. Because that's what resilient people are doing, and then they're adding in well-being into that. So.
Melody, I know you said that you're from Canada, and that tiny moment of joy reminded me we had some interns from Vancouver Institute work on some curriculum we have and backing it up with evidence-based practices. And one of the things they came up with was a DEAC group, DEAC. And in hockey, it's when you basically avoid a player with the puck. And so they named the group Drop Everything and Cope, because you're avoiding the escalation by doing a coping skill. And I thought that was really cute. And I know it's very hockey dependent, and most people in Canada will get it more than down here, but we got to take a little piece of Canada down with us.
I love that.
Excuse me, Sandy, thanks so much for being willing to present this material and spending this time with all of us. And I just have one question, and maybe you've already said the answer, but I'm wondering if you can elaborate on it. If there are, so I used to work in a wilderness therapy program, and I know just like learning from other staff was one way that I might have learned something like things like, how do I tell if I'm in my zone or out of my zone? I'm just wondering, you mentioned resourcing as being a big thing in helping that, but I'm wondering if there are other things you in particular do with staff teams that are activities that help with, give the knowledge base and that training for a staff team like that.
I think the critical piece is not just activities, but I think the missing link is you can do anything, right? Any sort of mindfulness activity or anything that brings people into contact with sensation. And I'm happy to just, spout off a list, which, are things that I've learned. But the biggest thing that I would add is that we draw people's attention to the shift. That it's not just about the doing, it's about noticing the shift. And in the noticing of the shift, is when you develop a more of a felt sense of what you're like when you're in your zone versus out of your zone. And as staff or as clinicians or as humans, as partners, as parents, like really knowing, like I really know that when I'm out of my zone, my thinking brain doesn't work. Like anybody ever go through time when you just like, you're like losing everything, like you lose your pencil and you lose your pen and you lose your keys and then you lose your wallet and, you know, and then you lose that paper that you were looking for, right? Before I would have been like, oh my God, I'm so ADHD and what is wrong with me? And then I'm like, oh wow, I'm way out of my zone. I'm losing everything. I've got to get back in my zone because my thinking brain is offline. And when my thinking brain is offline, not only do I lose all of my stuff, but I'm also not going to communicate effectively in my meeting or figure out the right way to deal with my child when they're making me insane because they won't go brush their teeth, right? Or deal with the client who's like staring at me in a way that's deeply unsettling, right? So the buy-in about understanding, like really seeing the way you operate in the world when you're out of your zone versus in the zone is kind of the critical piece. And we do that with simply creating opportunity to shift state and then asking people to notice the difference. So when I ask you what you notice, there's an intentionality to that. It's not just like, let's talk, let's process. It's actually intentional. And what you might not have been aware of, but if we had more time, we'd go through is I was actually menuing that. I was specifically saying, noticing the quality of your thoughts. And if we had more time, I would have said they might be looser or tighter. You're menuing it. Notice the quality of your emotions. Notice the parts of your body. So you start to create an awareness in that way. Okay. Now, in practical terms, it's anything that you do in mindfulness. It's anything that brings people into contact with sensation. When people are more activated, it takes more sensation. So you want to stay more external. So you can have people clap their hands, or you can have people go for a walk and stomp. These are tried and true things that are being done in wilderness. They're just not always being done from that lens, but they're already being done. Like have somebody push on a tree or push on a wall, super, super powerful. If you're sitting in a therapy office with somebody and they become really dysregulated when they're telling a story, have them get up and push on a wall. Or if that might be too vulnerable, then push their back on a wall, stomp their feet. I have a very heavy object in my office. It looks like Superman's crystals. It's like this weird obsidian thing. It's very, very heavy, and it has a lot of strong sensation. And when somebody's really dissociating or really activated, I'll give that to them. And then I joke around. I'm like, I'm not actually giving you like crystals because I'm trying to create a connection, trying to create safety through humor. But I'm also, but like, you know, I have them touch it and hold on to it and feel the weight. So I have all kinds of objects. They're like, a lot of them are nature objects and I use those in different ways, but they all have a lot of texture and weight and color. And so I'm purposefully doing that. So the more activated somebody is, the less resourcing is going to work. But what's going to work is bringing into direct contact with sensation. Okay, so like ice water works, or drinking water works, or rubbing your hands together works, or just sometimes I have people just do this. Right, this is a super good one. Like, I mean, this is total, like, I mean, it sounds so silly, but like, this is a combination of like EMDR and havening, which is this nice stroking. So I have people do a lot of this when they're really activated. And then I have them slow it down and just gently stroke their arms. And then if they have any sort of an energetic bent, then I just have them blow it off their fingers. But there's something about that bilateral stimulation and then slowing it that, you know, you can't get everybody to do that because they feel like a dork. But those who do it find it useful. So I don't know if that answered your question. There's like the conceptual, and then there's the what you actually do. But what you actually do can be anything, really. But sensation and awareness of the shift being the critical pieces. I want to just add, I think it's really important too. A lot of the people that come to these trainings, these talks, you might already be connected to your body, but recognizing that a lot of people aren't. And that people who have a lot of trauma, especially if they've been in and out of treatment, and where people make them do like sit spots and traditional mindfulness, where you just like sit and notice your thoughts, extraordinarily aversive. Like if your whole being has been about separating from uncomfortable sensations in order to function, and then somebody is just like, no, notice your body, you're not going to do it. Right. And then for the people that you're working with, you might be like, oh, this doesn't work with my population. But telling the people that you're working with that for some people, and maybe you, client or staff or whoever, find it really aversive to connect to your body. And there's a reason for that. And it might be really healing if you're willing to take the try to do it a little bit. Right? Because we all have a body and we all have a brain and we all have a nervous system. It's happening whether you know it or not. But teaching them that there's a reason why it doesn't feel good is also super useful. And then teaching them how to notice sensation instead of just being like, what do you notice? So, other questions, comments, thoughts?
I don't know if this lines up, so by all means tell me if I'm wrong, but I remember Katie telling us as an example, when we were all sitting on the floor, to put our hands on our thighs, and then as sort of an introduction to sensation and shift in perspective, shift in lens, it was pushing the palms of our hands into the bulk of our thighs, and then stopping and discussing it, and then pushing up with the tops of our thighs into the palms of our hands. So it was like, feel your hands touching your legs, and then feel the difference between that and your legs touching your hands. So it was I don't want to say it was an advanced kind of somatic walkthrough, but it provided, kind of planted the seeds for same action, different sensation. I don't know if that feeds into what you're talking about or not, but it popped into my head while you were discussing some of these topics tonight. So
I love that. I think it's critical that you get, especially, I mean, with the clients that I work with, I think it's critical that I create buy-in. And that's why I teach the hand model of the brain. That's why I teach the resilient zone. That's why I teach resourcing. And I repeatedly am telling them over and over again why it's important to connect to sensation. Right now in my practice, I have the luxury of telling people that this is the kind of work that I do, so they become a little self-selective. But like in the IOP group, I have no idea who's going to show up in the door. Right. And some people hate it. And some people always hate it, and I can't get the buy-in. But when I can, and we begin to play with the subtleties of sensation, like Matt's talking about, and you actually teach people to begin to experience some of the more nuances of it, so that resourcing becomes a richer experience, then that's when it starts to all really fit together. But if you don't have the buy-in, then you're just like yet another person who's making them breathe, right? Like everybody else who's ever made them like sit and breathe. I mean, I work with people who've been in and out of treatment like a bazillion times. So, but the buy-in, the pieces, the frameworks are things a lot of times that clients have not been taught. So if you're being taught like to push into your leg or push away from your leg, and that there's a difference in the nuances of that, if somebody just did that without explaining to you why that was relevant, you'd think they were a weirdo. Why is this even, why do we care about this?
I think that's a big part of the empowerment piece of the trauma-informed approach, is explaining what you're doing, without like all the psychobabble, but I never act like a superior authority. I want my clients to understand why I'm doing something, and also to give them the voice to be able to explain what they're going through, or to understand what they're going through. And that's why the hand model, the Dan Siegel, flipping your lib model, is great, because even a child can understand that, who doesn't necessarily understand what's going on with them in terms of their trauma reaction. They can get that part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They used to teach that in my kids' school. They stopped. It kind of went out of vogue, but they were teaching that from kindergarten through 5th grade.
I think that's one similar thing that I've kind of run into working with adolescents, is adolescents with trauma oftentimes are not in a place where they want to verbally or emotionally process some of that trauma, but even just getting back to their sensations and being able to regulate is such a powerful thing. So that's one of the things I've noticed with some of the students I've worked with, even to the point where I've finally saw like what true disassociation in like a catatonic state from a trauma response was. And just being able to slowly, even just like a slow head turn, and just getting like visual information, or just getting back into the senses, has been just incredibly incredibly powerful, but especially bilateral stimulation. But yeah, like you said, trying to get an adolescent or a teenager trying to do, butterfly tapping in a group of people is kind of can be an anxiety producing thing in itself too. But I've seen like once students kind of get over that, like the awkwardness of what it looks like, it's immensely powerful, which is really cool.
Totally. You all used to use the resilience zone. Is that still floating around in the culture?
Mhm.
Good. I mean, I think what you said about the dissociation piece is really important. I think we see way more dissociation than we realize. And beginning to really recognize the sort of when somebody goes into a sort of a place where they're not really moving and they're kind of blank staring a little bit. And of course there's the catatonic one, but even the one where somebody just gets real still, and recognizing that as a trauma response has been sort of a newer thing for me. And now I see it everywhere more. I didn't see it as much as I used to, but that as being a really important piece.
I saw something recently on social media about the idea of a kid that's mature for their age, being careful about that, because that might actually be a trauma response. Like a kid that does sit still and is quiet in class, and the teacher's like, oh, wow, look at that great kid, so mature, but that may actually be a trauma response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming. We really appreciate all of you. And thank you, Sandy, again for speaking. And if anybody needs CEU credit, shoot me an email and I will send you a certificate. It will probably be early next week, but I will get it to you. And I hope you guys have a great evening and that we see you at future ones. We do them on the last Thursday of every month, and we've had some really amazing speakers. So thanks for coming out and enjoy your weekends.
Thank you all so much for spending the evening with us. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Okay, good night, you guys.
It was a little meandery in the beginning. Was it okay?
It was great. Yeah,
It was great.
it was awesome.
It was great. I wish
loved
we could
how-
do these longer, but
Yeah, I loved how involved you got everyone. It was nice to see everyone. There've been like some where no one's cameras are on.
That's
And-
so weird.
And some where everyone's are, and it's just been fascinating to see who can like pull the cameras on, so Sandy was like, let's go, I'm calling you out by name.
stand up. We're doing the hokey pokey.
It's a thing when you're like, it's like a triumph, like when you're like, oh, look, people's cameras are on. Oh, this is so good. They're still on. Oh, look, everybody's there till the end. Ooh, it's like the whole online world's like its own little sort of reward system.
It's fascinating. This whole process is just this monthly thing has been a really interesting process. Like from going to no CEUs to CEUs, and then we've been toying with starting to charge even $1 just so people follow through with signing up. Like,
yeah, it's so
talking to
weird.
Bex, I was like, 24 people signed up for this, and we're stoked, and we had 12, which is great.
It happens every time, like unless
So
the
interesting.
person who signs up personally knows the speaker, like we've been having those ratios, and we cannot figure out what the mechanism of action is there.
I don't know. I think it's pretty common.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's hard though as a speaker, I'm like, oh, 25. Oh, really? It's 7 o'clock at night. Oh, that's weird. Okay. That's just the right amount.
Yeah.
Because you have to make different levels of plans, like small group, big group, introductions, no introductions.
When Bex and I did it, it was what, 2? There are 2 people?
Yeah, it was 2 people, and they kept their cameras off the whole time.
It was great.
And we asked for feedback a few times, and it was like, and we were just like, And then at the end, one of them was left there, so we knew that they were not there. And we
Yeah,
were like,
they were making.
oh, that went super well. But it was fun.
do
We
you
got
want-
to practice. So
It's true, yeah, and we have really good notes for when we do it at APNC, so it's good, but it was just like, it was flat. It was pretty flat.
yeah.
What's
Well,
APNC?
The Addiction Professionals of North Carolina Conference. They do it once here. Is it here? It's here. They do it once at where the symposium was.
Oh.
And then they do it in the fall in Wilmington, which is amazing. It's usually in Wrightsville Beach, and it's like at the end of October, which is like the best time to go to Wrightsville Beach.
Right.
So yeah, we got invited to Chris Campo, who does the collegiate recovery kind of as a board member of the APNC. He invited us to present based on what we do.
What are you going to talk about?
We're doing the same theme, the therapeutic alliance, embracing the therapeutic alliance, transformation through relationship, kind of throwing our own little niche tagline in there. And then
we're gonna tell like a story of a client and then connect all of these like X factors of building the therapeutic alliance through it. So hopefully it's pretty cool.
Nice. Awesome.
Well,
Cool.
I'm gonna go. My mind is melting. So
Thank you.
thank you and have the
Yeah.
best night.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
all right, stop the recording there.